Ryan Reynolds sat alone in his Los Angeles apartment, staring at the rejection letter that had just arrived. It was 2004, and the paper in his hands felt heavier than it should. Another no. Another door slammed in his face. Another executive telling him he wasn't leading man material. He crumpled the letter slowly, deliberately, as if the act itself could somehow change what it said. Outside his window, the city buzzed with life and possibility, but inside these four walls, silence pressed down like a weight on his chest. The phone rang. It was his agent, and Ryan already knew what was coming. The pitch they'd spent months developing had been passed over. Again. The studio executives had laughed, actually laughed, when his name came up for the lead role. Too goofy, they said. Too much of a pretty boy. Not serious enough. The words cut deeper than any knife could. He'd spent years working, grinding, taking every small role he could find, and still, Hollywood saw him as nothing more than a punchline. His bank account told a brutal story. The sitcom days were behind him, but the movie career he'd dreamed of remained frustratingly out of reach. He'd landed small parts, sure, but nothing that stuck. Nothing that made people remember his name the next day. His friends from acting school were booking campaigns and series regulars. Some had already given up and moved back home. Ryan wondered if he was fooling himself, chasing a dream that would never materialize. That night, he walked through the streets of Hollywood, past the same studios that kept turning him away. The irony wasn't lost on him. He lived in the entertainment capital of the world, yet he couldn't get anyone to take him seriously. Every audition felt like a battle he was destined to lose. The casting directors would smile politely, thank him for coming in, and he'd see it in their eyes, the dismissal, the already made decision before he'd even read a line. His mother had warned him about this industry. She'd seen the toll it took, the way it chewed people up and spit them out without a second thought. But Ryan had been convinced he was different, that his charisma and work ethic would be enough. Now, standing under the glow of streetlights that illuminated nothing but his own doubt, he questioned everything. Maybe the executives were right. Maybe he was just a funny guy, destined for supporting roles and forgettable comedies. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself. It was the laughter. He'd heard about it through the industry grapevine, the way his name had become a joke in certain boardrooms. Ryan Reynolds? For an action hero? For a dramatic lead? The idea seemed to amuse them endlessly. They'd typecast him before he'd even had a chance to show what he could do. Every audition became a performance not just of the character, but of his own worth, his own right to be taken seriously. He thought about quitting. The thought came more often now, creeping in during the quiet moments. He could go back to Canada, find something stable, something that didn't require him to beg for opportunities. His father had never understood the acting dream anyway. Maybe it was time to admit defeat, to accept that some dreams were meant to stay dreams. But something stubborn lived inside him, something that refused to break no matter how many times he got knocked down. That stubborn spark was all he had left. It was the only thing keeping him going when logic screamed at him to stop. Ryan made a decision that night, walking back to his apartment under a sky that held no answers. He wouldn't quit. Not yet. Not ever. They could laugh all they wanted, but he'd make them remember his name. Somehow, some way, he'd prove every single one of them wrong. The script landed on Ryan's doorstep like fate wrapped in paper. Deadpool. A character nobody wanted to touch, from a studio desperate enough to consider anyone. The project had been in development hell for years, passed around like a hot potato nobody wanted to hold. Comic book movies were booming, sure, but this wasn't your typical superhero. This was violent, crude, self-aware, and completely insane. Every studio in town had already said no. The budget was a joke. The rating would alienate mainstream audiences. It would never work. Ryan read it in one sitting, and something clicked. This character was everything Hollywood told him he couldn't be. Deadpool was funny but dangerous, charming but broken, a hero who acknowledged he was in a movie while brutally taking down bad guys. It was lightning in a bottle, if anyone had the guts to actually make it. But that was the problem. Nobody had the guts. The executives looked at the script and saw a career-ending disaster waiting to happen. He started his campaign immediately. Every meeting, every conversation, every chance encounter with anyone connected to the project, Ryan pushed. He studied the comics obsessively, learning every detail of Wade Wilson's story. He trained his body, transforming himself into the physical specimen the role demanded. He practiced the voice, the mannerisms, the dark humor that made Deadpool unique. He didn't just want the part. He needed it. This was his shot, his one chance to break free from the box they'd put him in. The studio executives remained skeptical. They'd seen passionate actors before, seen people convinced they were perfect for a role. Passion didn't sell tickets. Names sold tickets, and despite years in the industry, Ryan's name didn't carry weight. They had lists of bigger stars, safer choices, people who wouldn't require them to take such a massive risk. Why bet on the guy everyone laughed at when they could hire someone proven? Months turned into years. The project stalled, restarted, died, and somehow came back to life. Ryan refused to let go. While other actors moved on to different projects, he kept circling back, kept pushing, kept believing in something nobody else could see. His persistence became legendary in industry circles, but not in a good way. People thought he was crazy, obsessed, wasting his time on a movie that would never get made. His own team started suggesting he focus his energy elsewhere. Then came the test footage. Ryan convinced someone, somehow, to shoot a brief scene. Just enough to show what Deadpool could be. The footage leaked online, and something miraculous happened. Fans went absolutely wild. The internet exploded with demand for a full movie. Suddenly, the project everyone had dismissed as impossible became the film everyone wanted to see. The studio couldn't ignore the response. They were backed into a corner by public enthusiasm. But they still didn't want to spend money on it. The budget was slashed to nothing. They'd make the movie, fine, but they weren't going to risk major capital on it. Ryan would have to prove himself with one hand tied behind his back. No money for big action sequences. No funds for extensive effects. Everything would have to be creative, smart, done on a shoestring compared to other superhero films. It was a setup for failure, and everyone knew it. Ryan accepted every condition. He'd take a smaller paycheck. He'd do whatever it took. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about proving that he belonged, that he could carry a film, that everyone who'd laughed at him had been wrong. The pressure was enormous. If Deadpool failed, it wouldn't just end the franchise before it began. It would confirm every doubt, every dismissal, every executive who'd said he wasn't leading man material. Filming was chaos. The limited budget meant they had to be clever with every shot, every scene. Ryan threw himself into the role with an intensity that bordered on possession. He improvised constantly, finding moments of brilliance in the constraints. The mask became his ally, letting him disappear into Wade Wilson completely. When injuries happened, he pushed through. When exhaustion set in, he found another gear. This was everything he'd worked for, concentrated into one impossible project. The premiere approached with a sense of dread hanging over Ryan's head. Deadpool was finished, but the industry buzz was mixed at best. Critics who'd seen early footage were divided. Some loved the irreverence and violence. Others thought it was trying too hard, that it would alienate audiences who wanted traditional superhero stories. The studio had minimal faith, dumping the film into a February release slot typically reserved for movies they expected to fail. February was where films went to die quietly. Ryan couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Everything he'd sacrificed, every rejection he'd endured, every moment of doubt and struggle, had led to this. If the movie bombed, he'd be the punchline again, except this time it would be worse. This time, he'd had his shot and blown it spectacularly. The executives who'd laughed at him would feel vindicated. They'd been right all along. He wasn't leading man material. He was just the funny guy who got lucky once and wasted everyone's time. The marketing team did what they could with their limited budget. Ryan became the campaign himself, doing interviews, creating viral content, connecting directly with fans through social media in ways most actors avoided. He broke the fourth wall in real life just like Deadpool did on screen, blurring the lines between character and actor. It was unconventional, risky, and exactly the kind of thing studios usually forbid. But at this point, what did he have to lose? Opening night arrived like a judgment day. Ryan sat in the theater, surrounded by strangers who had no idea the emotional journey behind the film they were about to watch. The lights dimmed. The movie started. Within minutes, the audience was laughing. Not polite chuckles, but genuine, explosive laughter. Then came the action, and they gasped. The emotion hit, and some people cried. By the time the credits rolled, the theater erupted in applause. The box office numbers came in, and nobody could believe them. Deadpool had demolished expectations. It wasn't just a hit. It was a phenomenon. The film that every studio had dismissed as too risky, too weird, too impossible, had become the highest-grossing R-rated movie of all time. Audiences connected with the character in ways that defied industry logic. They loved the humor, the violence, the heart underneath the crude exterior. They loved Ryan's performance. Suddenly, everything changed. The same executives who'd laughed now wanted meetings. The same casting directors who dismissed him now called his agent. Offers poured in, big-budget projects with real resources and respect. Ryan Reynolds was no longer a punchline. He was a bankable star, someone who'd proven he could carry a massive film and deliver both critically and commercially. The laughter had turned to stunned silence, then grudging admiration. But success brought its own pressures. Hollywood wanted to replicate the formula, to bottle whatever magic Deadpool had contained. They offered Ryan every superhero property they could think of, every action franchise that needed reviving. Everyone wanted a piece of what he'd created. The industry that had once shut him out now wanted to own him, to control the very thing that made him unique. Ryan navigated the attention carefully. He'd learned hard lessons about the business, about how quickly admiration could turn to exploitation. He took meetings but remained selective. The success of Deadpool hadn't just opened doors for him personally. It had proven that audiences were hungry for something different, for stories that took risks and respected their intelligence. He felt a responsibility to the fans who'd made this possible. Behind closed doors, Ryan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not triumph, not gloating, just a quiet acknowledgement that he'd been right. All those years of rejection and doubt, all those executives who dismissed him, they'd missed something fundamental. They'd mistaken his humor for lack of depth, his charm for superficiality. They'd never looked deep enough to see the dedication, the intelligence, the sheer stubborn will that drove him forward. The film industry is built on patterns and precedents. Studios invest in what they know, what feels safe, what has worked before. Ryan had broken that pattern by refusing to accept their limitations. Deadpool's success wasn't just his victory. It was a victory for every actor told they weren't enough, every creative told their vision was too risky, every dreamer dismissed by people who claimed to know better. Success could have been the end of the story, but Ryan Reynolds understood something crucial. One hit movie didn't guarantee lasting power in Hollywood. The industry was littered with actors who'd had their moment and then faded back into obscurity. He needed to build something more, something sustainable, something that couldn't be taken away when tastes changed or the next hot thing came along. He needed to become more than just an actor. He needed to become a brand. Aviation gin seemed like an odd choice. Everyone questioned it. Why would a newly successful movie star invest in a gin company? It made no sense by traditional standards. But Ryan saw what others missed. He understood marketing in the digital age, understood how authenticity and humor could cut through the noise of traditional advertising. He didn't just invest money. He invested himself, creating campaigns that felt personal, funny, and genuine in ways corporate advertising never achieved. The gin ads went viral, each one more clever than the last. Ryan wrote many of them himself, bringing the same self-aware humor that made Deadpool work. He poked fun at celebrity endorsements while being a celebrity endorsement. He made the product secondary to the entertainment, trusting that if people enjoyed the content, they'd remember the brand. It was counterintuitive, but it worked brilliantly. Aviation gin sales exploded. Then came Mint Mobile. Another unexpected move. Cellular service? Really? But again, Ryan saw opportunity where others saw mundane business. He approached the marketing with the same irreverent style, creating ads that made people laugh while highlighting genuinely better prices. He became the face of the brand, using his platform to reach consumers tired of traditional telecom companies. The ads were cheap to produce but reached millions through social media sharing. Hollywood watched with fascination and confusion. Ryan Reynolds was becoming a business mogul while maintaining his acting career. He wasn't following any established playbook. Traditional stars did endorsements, sure, but they didn't fundamentally reshape how those brands communicated with consumers. They didn't take ownership stakes and creative control. They certainly didn't make the advertising more famous than the products themselves. Maximum Effort, his production company, became the engine driving all of this. Ryan had learned from Deadpool that creative control mattered more than big budgets. Maximum Effort produced his ads, his content, his projects, all with a distinct voice that felt authentic to who he was. The company's name itself was a statement of intent. Everything they created required maximum effort, complete commitment, no half measures. The critics who'd once dismissed him now studied his moves. Business schools analyzed his marketing strategies. Advertising agencies tried to replicate his approach, usually failing because they couldn't capture the genuine personality that made it work. Ryan had turned his rejection and struggle into fuel for innovation. While other celebrities followed established paths to success, he'd created his own roadmap entirely. Deadpool's sequel came with a much bigger budget and much higher expectations. The pressure was different now. The first film had been an underdog story. Nobody expected it to succeed, which gave them freedom to take risks. The sequel had to prove Deadpool wasn't a fluke, that Ryan could deliver again with the whole world watching. Some actors would have played it safe, given the studio what they wanted, protected their newfound status. Ryan doubled down on everything that made the first film work. More humor, more violence, more heart, more risk. He fought for creative decisions the studio questioned. He insisted on maintaining the character's integrity even when it meant difficult conversations with executives who wanted safer choices. The sequel was his chance to prove he understood why Deadpool worked, that it wasn't accident or luck but deliberate craft and vision. When the sequel succeeded, surpassing even the first film's numbers, it cemented everything. Ryan Reynolds wasn't a one-hit wonder. He was a force in the industry, someone who understood audiences better than most executives with decades of experience. He'd proven that taking risks and trusting your instincts could work, that audiences rewarded authenticity and creativity over safe, formulaic content. His business ventures sold for massive profits. Aviation Gin was acquired in a deal that made headlines. Mint Mobile followed. Ryan had turned side projects into financial windfalls, proving his instincts extended beyond entertainment. The kid who couldn't get taken seriously was now being courted by major corporations wanting his marketing genius, his ability to connect with consumers in meaningful ways. Years passed, and Hollywood continued its relentless evolution. Stars who'd been riding high when Ryan was struggling had faded. Franchises that seemed invincible had collapsed. Studios that dismissed him had been sold or restructured. The industry's brutal nature never stopped, never slowed, crushing careers and dreams with the same indifference it had shown him back in 2004. But Ryan Reynolds was still standing. More than standing. He was thriving in ways nobody could have predicted. The secret wasn't talent alone, though he had plenty of that. It wasn't luck, though timing played its role. The secret was something deeper, something forged in those dark years of rejection. Ryan had learned that success in Hollywood wasn't about pleasing executives or following established patterns. It was about understanding audiences, about creating genuine connections, about being willing to risk everything for something you believed in completely. He'd become a different kind of star for a different era. While others relied on publicists and carefully managed images, Ryan engaged directly with fans through social media, showing personality and humor that felt authentic because it was. While others chased prestige projects and awards, he focused on making content people actually wanted to watch, content that entertained and resonated without pretension or manipulation. The executive who'd laughed hardest at his Deadpool pitch years ago ran into Ryan at an industry event. The man approached awkwardly, clearly hoping Ryan had forgotten or wouldn't bring it up. Instead of anger or vindication, Ryan just smiled and shook his hand. No hard feelings. The rejection had been necessary, part of the journey that made everything else possible. Without those closed doors, he never would have fought hard enough to kick down the right one. Young actors now sought his advice. They came to him with the same desperation he'd once felt, wondering if they should keep going or give up. Ryan told them the truth. Hollywood would try to put them in boxes, tell them who they could and couldn't be. Executives would laugh at their dreams, dismiss their passion as naivety. Success wasn't guaranteed, no matter how hard they worked. But if they truly believed in something, if they were willing to fight for it with everything they had, then maybe, just maybe, they could create something the industry didn't know it needed. His marriage to Blake Lively showed another side of his journey. She understood the industry's demands, the pressure, the constant scrutiny. Together they built a life that balanced public success with private happiness, raising their children away from the spotlight's harshest glare. Ryan had learned that winning in Hollywood meant nothing if you lost yourself in the process. Real success meant maintaining your relationships, your values, your humanity despite the industry's attempts to strip all that away. The Deadpool franchise became his legacy, but it was about more than box office numbers or comic book adaptations. It represented possibility, proof that unconventional ideas could succeed if someone fought hard enough for them. It showed that audiences were smarter and more receptive to risk than executives believed. It demonstrated that one person's vision, backed by absolute commitment, could reshape how an entire genre approached storytelling. Ryan never forgot where he came from. The struggling actor sitting alone in his apartment, reading rejection letters, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. That version of himself lived inside him still, keeping him grounded, reminding him why success mattered. Not for the money or fame or validation, though those were nice. It mattered because it proved that the people who'd laughed had been wrong. Dead wrong. Looking back at his journey, Ryan Reynolds saw a story of persistence outlasting doubt, of vision overcoming skepticism, of one person refusing to accept other people's limitations. Hollywood had tried to define him, to put him in a box labeled not leading man material. Instead, he'd redefined what a leading man could be, creating his own category that others now tried to imitate. The laughter had stopped long ago. In its place came respect, admiration, and recognition that Ryan Reynolds had done something remarkable. He'd taken an industry that thrives on conformity and carved out space for something different. He'd turned rejection into fuel, doubt into determination, and failure into stepping stones toward unprecedented success. He was the last man standing not because others had fallen, but because he'd never stopped getting back up. Every knockdown, every rejection, every moment of doubt had been a test, and he'd passed them all. Not by being perfect, not by never failing, but by refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier, when quitting would have been understandable, when quitting was exactly what everyone expected him to do. The title fit perfectly. They'd laughed at him, mocked his dreams, dismissed his potential. But Ryan Reynolds had the last laugh. And what made it sweet wasn't proving them wrong, though that helped. What made it sweet was proving to himself that he'd been right all along. The dream was worth fighting for. The risk was worth taking. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person everyone underestimates becomes exactly the person nobody can ignore.